There still will be an annual meeting. Yeah. No. Yeah, and this is literally. It's hard to say we're making it up as we go, but there is a little bit of that. There is a lot of ambiguity. Yeah. You being. All good. All right, thanks.
Green light should be on. All right, I will call to order the May 21st, 2025 meeting of the City of West Sacramento's Public Financing Authority meeting. For today, Mayor Guerrero, would you like to lead the group in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, under God.
Thank you and welcome everyone to the 2025 meeting of the PFA. I'll start with the first item on the agenda, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the authority. Madam Clerk, are there any public comments?
We have no request to speak.
Okay, thank you. Well, in that case, I'll move on next to the consent agenda, which consists of items 2, 3, and 4. I'd like to remove item 4 off the consent agenda for discussion, but I'll open it up to the fellow board members if any other members want to pull any items off.
No request, move to approve those.
And just to clarify, that's with pulling off item 4.
Holding up.
Okay. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Member Alcala, Member Sulpicio Hull,
Aye.
Member Guerrero,
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez,
Aye.
Chair Hirsch.
Aye. The ayes have it. In that case, with the consent agenda being approved other than item 4, I'll turn it over to item 4. Consideration of Resolution 25-2 of the City of West Sacramento's EIFD Public Financing Authority approving minor changes to the budget policy.
Mr. Chair, would you like a presentation on this, or do you want to just go to questions?
I think a presentation might be helpful for my fellow board members if it's not too much of an inconvenience for Mr. Polimas.
Yes. Good evening, Chair and members of the board. Mark Polhemus, Community Investment Manager. I don't have slides prepared for this item, but what is in your agenda under item 4 are minor changes to the EIFD policy, which was adopted last year. I believe via resolution 24 dash, ooh.
25-2?
I'm sorry?
25-2?
That's the one that I was on today, but it is a minor update to the policy that was adopted at last year's August 21st meeting. We had established this policy, and it was an item that had been delayed from previous years. and the city or the PFA, we had not appropriated any funds for any projects with with revenues generated in the EIFD fund because prior board had established that we needed to set a policy for how revenues would be expended consistent or for projects that are on the IFP list, and how the PFA and the city would prioritize those projects that are funded. So what we did is last year we brought a recommendation to approve budget policy, and when we approved that budget policy that was approved, we come to realize that it kind of constrains us from being able to appropriate funds from the EIFD or the EIFD fund timely with project prioritization, especially when there are instances when we need to be able to provide local match funding for grants or local gap funding for grants, and also to address, the unknowns that happen with capital projects where that's, as costs escalate over time and we need to appropriate additional funds down the line. What we had established in that policy was that funds would be appropriated through the biennial budget, which occurs every 2 years, and we needed to be a little bit more responsive to CIP needs and funding needs. So this budget policy primarily cleans that up so that we have the ability to be able to appropriate funds from the EIFD fund in a timely manner that's more consistent with our budget processes that occur several times within that biennial budget time frame.
Well, thank you, Mr. Plumas. I appreciate you walking us through the proposed change.
Mhm.
I have a few questions, but before I begin, I'll turn it over to my fellow board members if any other board member has a question they'd like to begin with. If not, then Mr. Plumas, again, thank you for the presentation, and I agree with the need to act quickly and flexibly at times if there are grant opportunities. My concern, though, is on page 28 of the agenda pack, which is the actual language red line changes to the EIFD's budget policy. From my understanding, and please do correct me if you interpret it differently, under the current budget policy, when it comes to any changes to the EIFD's infrastructure financing plan, the current process, as I read the red lines, is that changes are recommended by the city council and then approved by the PFA. What the red lines are doing on the bottom of page 28 of the packet is clarifying that so that now proposed changes to projects consistent with the IFP are approved by the council and received by the Public Financing Authority. Is that right?
That's how it reads, yeah.
Okay. And so my question then is, if the purpose of this change is to help provide, again, more flexibility to take advantage of grant opportunities or any other changes in funding for projects already approved or consistent with the infrastructure financing plan, what the rationale is of doing this change so that the council approves it instead of the PFA approves. How would that speed up the process?
I think what perhaps there's a needing for minor edits to even this policy is here. We are not, the intent of this is not to make those changes to the IFP without the approval of the PFA. And it's for the funding and how we need to appropriate the funds would give us that flexibility to be able to either reappropriate funds that are on that IFP list that gets approved, that has been approved by the PFA, or if there are any amendments to the any amendments to the infrastructure finance plan, that project list, that would go through the process that is outlined in the EIFD law, that it would occur at the annual review period, and also go through the proper noticing requirements. As you know and understand, the legislation is currently changing or ongoingly changing. So we wanted to be able to just tie how we appropriate funds to that IFP, knowing that over time our IFP may change in response to legislative updates, in response to changes or updates within our future general plan or specific plans our capital improvement project such that the updates then occur through that the IFP update annual review process. I think it's not the intent that we circumvent that. It is the intent that we go through that IFP update through that annual review with the proper required noticings. But then, given the timeliness of demands and how we need to be able to expend funds, that as long as it's on that IFP, as long as if it's a project that is under categories within the IFP, then that would give council that flexibility to be able to recommend those changes or recommend those appropriations.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Plemas. I know I'm asking very technical questions in the weeds here. And I certainly, again, agree with the intent if it's to provide more flexibility. But as you just stated, it sounded like the question hinges, is it the council recommending these changes to the PFA for approval, or is it the council is approving these changes and simply then submitting it to the PFA for, as I read it, received. And so I certainly don't want to stand in the way. I guess my suggestion or recommendation, perhaps, of course, is if the board agrees with the recommended action today by staff, we at least make sure then that the PFA can meet more regularly to make sure that it's taking its proper role in the process to review or approve changes to the IFP or changes consistent with the IFP. Because again, as an enhanced infrastructure financing district, we are a separate entity from the city, and so decisions about the projects funded from the EIFD, by my understanding of the California government code, are supposed to be made by the EIFD's public financing authority, not the city council. So those are my comments, and again, I thank you for helping clarify this. I'll again turn it over to the board if any other board members have any questions. Board Member Guerrero.
Yes, I would like to ask for clarification about the role as far as oversight authority and what the chair is asking, just to make sure we have a deeper dive as it relates to the process.
Sure. High level, it's to, what we've already accomplished, the big feat of forming the EIFD. So PFA forms that EIFD. PFA approves alongside with City Council the issuances of bonds that occur through the EIFD. Any recommended changes that happen to the infrastructure finance plan, whether it's projects that are in the big umbrella of that project list, as well as the amounts that can be allocated, the amount of funding that could be allocated to that plan and that would contribute to the EIFD. Those are, broadly recommendations or authority under the PFA to be able to decide. I'll look over to my city manager and attorney for additional considerations.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. I just return to the prior discussion on your question. I think the nuance here is what we're trying to accomplish with this policy change, and maybe we can be a little more explicit, is to guide the expenditures of EIP funds versus making actual changes to the IFP. I don't think there's any argument here from the staff side or even from our attorneys that if we're proposing actual amendments to the IFP, that the oversight of that process doesn't reside with the PFA board. However, what we're trying to do in the interest of streamlining the ability to expend EIFD bond funds, especially on projects where we may have like 2 weeks to do a grant application to match funding with those. And we know that the project we're applying for is consistent or very explicitly stated in the IFP as a project or a type of project, to not have to do, like a 2 meeting kind of thing where we have to put together a PFA meeting and a council meeting. So I think whether we want to wordsmith it here, or I think take your suggestion and as we're moving forward, make sure, as long as we're clear that the intent of this is to not, move the authority to approve or consider IFP amendments from this board to the council, but more so to deal with the expenditure of actual EIFD funding, and make that decision is one that resides with the city council in terms of the CIP process, then I think we're comfortable with that. Mark, you want to?
I agree.
Okay. So if that's helpful, I mean, we can make the language a little more explicit here if that's helpful. This would be the time to do it. Otherwise, we're returning to this board, and we have an idea from Tracy here.
Evening, Chair, members of the authority. We just realized there's another portion of the budget policy that was not modified to reflect the red line changes that we would need to also adjust, and we would want to try to accomplish that with any other potential modifications tonight. It is in the under, if you have your packet or the item, the resolution that's red, or the budget policy that's red line, where it says at the bottom of the page, EIFD number 1, revenue allocation. The last sentence of that paragraph, we still reflect that EIFD bond proceeds will be recommended by the council and considered by the EIFD Public Financing Authority for approval. And that would not be consistent with the other. So we would need to modify that.
Would you clarify what that change would be?
Yes.
If I may help.
We
Ms.
recommended it would be reviewed and approved by City Council and received by the EIFD Public Financing Authority as part of the annual review. Instead of
Received.
right, it would be received versus considered by the EIFD Public Financing Authority for approval. Because the approval component, as long as it's consistent with the IFP, is being placed with the council for review. So we would need to modify.
No, thank you, Ms. Michael. And just to confirm with Mr. City Attorney, then we are able to make those modifications tonight without notice. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then taking it back to the board for discussion and consideration of the additional changes recommended by staff.
Outside of that, the language that Tracy just shared, what would be the wordsmithing on the previous page?
At the bottom of page 28.
Yeah, that we're doing on the spot. Sorry.
Mr. City Manager was the one who suggested some.
Again, you're referring to page 28,
Mm-hmm.
the first or the bottom full paragraph.
If
Can I
I may make a
suggestion?
suggestion.
I'm
I'm
not
sorry,
su-
Mr. City Attorney.
I don't think it has to get wordsmithed tonight if the board is comfortable with it and having it come back for a subsequent revision. I'm always a little leery of doing on-the-fly editing to something where you need a chance to actually make sure that you don't have an unintended consequence by changing something that has a ripple somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think it's all about understanding the intent here, and I think what I am understanding is that the concern, Mr. Chair, you have is that when we're talking about amendments to the IFP, which is a plan that is approved by this board, those changes, in your view, and I think we have agreement on this, should be considered by this board. What we also want to be clear about is the other part that Tracy just pointed out. When we're talking about expenditures of actual EIFD funds, our intent is to allow those decisions to be made by the city council, provided that they are consistent with the projects listed in the IFP. And that would be confirmed by this board through the annual reporting process. We also have quite a number of eyes on this process when we're talking about use of bonds. But as long as we're clear about those two things, we will return with this policy at the next chance for this meeting to occur, which may not be for a little while. But we'll have revised language on that first part to clarify that amendments to the IFP are intended to be reviewed by this board, but that expenditures of EIFD funds are under the purview of the city council and then reported to this board through the annual reporting process.
And I certainly don't mean, Mr. City Manager, and thank you, I don't mean to stand in the way of the city council's appropriate authority in the space of any changes to funds that have been appropriated within the scope of the city. My, again, only concern, as you just said, it may be a long time until this board meets again to review a change. And so, given the role of the Public Financing Authority, and given this change, I would say proposed changes to projects consistent with the IFP, I do feel that if there are changes even consistent with the IFP, they do need to be reviewed by the PFA more than just on an annual basis, so that the EIFD's governing authority has proper notice and awareness of changes that are consistent. My other question is, given that this is a need for flexibility, and given we aren't the only EIF, we're the first, but we're not the only, have other EIFDs and cities in the state found a similar issue and proposed a similar fix to that issue, or are we treading on novel ground now?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know that anyone's really as far along as we are, so I'm sure this issue has come up. Constantine may have something to say on this, but I'll go back to kind of the first part you said. I want to be clear tonight too. There is no intent to, like the minute we do this tonight, to go amend the IFP. What we're trying to do here is be clear about, we want to be more, on the part about being more nimble, that has to do with the expenditure of the funds, so that if we have, a number of projects that the council could consider for expenditure of EIFD funds that are consistent with the IFP, and we have a grant opportunity, which comes up quite a bit, and the need to program money quickly, the council has the ability to do that as long as it's consistent with the projects in the IFP. Now, if the scenario was that same thing, but we have to amend the IFP because the project isn't in it, that's a different story. And I think that's a scenario that we would deal with through a different process where we would return to this board to amend the actual IFP. The other thing I'll point out, the law is evolving, and this is an issue that, we may have a need to come back and make a change because there's a change to the law as well. So part of the request for a little bit of leniency in terms of how this board is approaching this issue is with that in mind as well, because this has been an evolving legal process with the districts being as new as they are. So Constantine, did you want to weigh in on this at all? Or?
Good evening, board members. Konstantin Baranoff. I'm the bond counsel with Lozano Smith, also a proud resident of West Sacramento for my entire life. So nice to be working on a project. What Aaron, city manager Aaron Laurel described is exactly true. The EIFD law is evolved. West Sacramento is the very first city. PFA is the very first PFA to be issuing. So the mechanics of how to pull bond proceeds from the PFA to be expended by the city timely basis is evolved. I think what city staff, PFA staff has proposed is a very workable solution. It's not necessary to have projects that have been vetted and approved, listed in the IFP, be then approved by the city council, then also be approved by the PFA. That slows it down. The PFA doesn't meet as often as the city. So what the flexibility is what they're trying to achieve, that makes sense. If the IFP is going to be amended, of course, statutes require PFA being responsible for reviewing those changes and running the amendment process and all the noticing process pursuant to the EIFD law. Annual expenditures by the EIFD will be reviewed by the PFA board on an annual basis through the annual reporting process. So the PFA board will know at the end of each year through the annual report and the audit of what was spent by the city using the EIFD process. So I think what you have is a workable solution, and to avoid clunkiness that may happen if you have to have approvals be double approved by the city council, funding approvals be approved by the city council and the PFA.
Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you. Why is it that the EIFD doesn't meet more often? Is there a reason? Is there a prohibition? Is something that says they only meet once a year?
No, it's more based on the actual functions of the board. So the times where you are required to meet are times like this, where we're considering the issuance of bonds. A lot of the EIFD PFA role is in, as I think Mark outlined, is in the setup phase of the EIFD. So when we're in the formation process, there are a lot more meetings that occur then. But once you're formed and you're operating, unless you're in the process of issuing bonds, which we are today, the only required meeting is to, I believe, have a public hearing every year to review the annual report and accept the audit. So there's no technical reason why I couldn't meet more, but part of our, the way we generally try to operate in West Sacramento in general is we don't want to have extra meetings when they're unnecessary. So what we're trying to do here is strike that balance. And I think the chair has raised a good point that when we're talking about actual amendments to the plan, there's no reason that we shouldn't be returning to the board to have those considered. But when it comes to expenditures of the funds and the projects are in the IFP, they're consistent with everything. In order to stay most efficient, the proposal there is just to have the city council act as the approval for how to spend the fund.
Board Member Sulpicio Hall?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I guess I need some clarity on your language. Are you looking for the PFA to meet to approve projects?
Not necessarily, because again, I agree with the intent to provide flexibility, and if these are projects already consistent with the IFP, the council's role then is to, of course, make modifications. But I do agree with what Board Member Alcala just brought up then, which is the PFA is still supposed to have a role, and so perhaps instead of the current language where it would say received by the authority through the EIFD annual report, we can at least ensure that the EIFD members, particularly the public members of the PFA, receive notice more frequently than once a year for an annual report. If not having an actual EIFD PFA meeting, I just want to make sure that the PFA is properly notified if any changes, even changes consistent with the IFP are.
Sure. So as funding expenditures occur at the city council level, when we're programming our CIP, we can definitely work into a process where we're informing the PFA board that, here are the expenditures the city council agreed to make. So I think that's something that administratively we can accomplish.
Any other questions from board members or comments?
I want to go back to your recommended suggested change. Did you want to make a change at this point, knowing that you will be able to receive an update?
And thank you, Board Member Guerrero. I was just going to ask a clarification then from Mr. City Attorney. If there's hesitancy to tweak the proposed changes on page 28, but agreement to now do tweaks on page 29 as recommended by Ms. Michael, I just want to make sure that that is proper, and if that's the decision of the, so first asking then if it's proper to make some tweaks but not others.
I think it's up to you, how comfortable you are. If you want to entertain some additional language or some modification to the proposed language, you can certainly do that tonight. I was just suggesting that if there isn't an urgency, that staff be allowed to come back to you with modification. The change that Ms. Michael is suggesting, as I understood it, was one word to take out considered and replaced by received.
I think she was also recommending changing recommended by the city council and putting approved by the city council.
Approved by the city council and received, similar to the other language. But it is in your discretion. If you're comfortable moving forward tonight, you can. If you're not, then as I understand it, I'm looking to the others, and this could come back.
For issuing bonds in 30 days, the edits will have to be made within a few months. So keep that in mind. You will have a meeting within the next. Bond proceeds have to start flowing out of. Just for not going to. Well, no. We should not wait a year to fix it. That will back.
Constantine, is there any reason we can't take this item up last on this agenda? If we want to table it right now and we can work together to come up with proposed language? Okay. That'd be my recommendation. It's not complicated. I think we can take what you have in mind and get some wording together, and then take what Tracy noted and do that too, and then proceed with the the rest of the agenda
Thank you for
and
that.
revisit at the end.
Thank you for that update. In that case, I'll turn it back to the board if there's any additional comments, or if we want to make a motion to table this item to the end of the meeting based on the city manager's recommendation.
I'll go ahead and move.
To table?
I think we have a motion by
To the
member Alcala and a second by member Guerrero to table this item for now until the end of the meeting. Do we need a vote on that motion to table, Madam Clerk?
I think you should, since you've got a motion in a second.
Okay. In that case, Madam Clerk.
Member Alcala?
Aye.
Member Sulpicio Hull?
Sure.
Member Guerrero?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez?
Aye.
Chair Hirsch?
Aye. The ayes have it, and the motion is tabled for now. And in the interest of time, moving to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 5, the public hearing and consideration of Resolution 25-1 of the City of West Sacramento, EIFD PFA, approving annual review of the infrastructure financing plan, adoption of annual report, and related act.
Good evening again. All right, thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the board. As you heard earlier, my name is Mark Paul Hemus. I'm Community Investment Manager with the city. This evening, I am presenting to you item 5 of tonight's agenda, which is related to the procedural actions required by the EIFD Public Finance Authorities to review materials related to the activities of the EIFD in accordance with the EIFD law. I don't want to get this wrong, so give me one. All right. And so this item includes a public hearing on the EIFD #1 annual report for fiscal year 2024-2025. And upon closing of the public hearing, consideration of adoption of PFA Resolution 25-1, approving the EIFD #1 Infrastructure Finance Plan Annual Review and Annual Report for fiscal year 24-25. So as a very brief overcap of EIFD #1, the district includes 14 different sub-areas, covers about 1/4 of the city's land area. And the areas included in the EIFD were all previously included in the former redevelopment agency area. And the district raises funds through property tax increment as a result of the assessed value increases related to growth and investment that occurs within district boundary. The revenues generated are not a new tax on property owners, but the overall growth resulting from increases in assessed values from the base year of 2017, which the EIFD was formed. The district structure, goals, financing approach, and allowable use of funds are documented and directed by the Infrastructure Finance Plan, which was approved upon formation of the EIFD. The city uses EIFD revenues to invest in infrastructure and other public facilities that will induce further private investment and growth. And the EIFD may be eligible to receive tax increment for 45 years from the issuance of a bond or loan by the district, something I will be learning more in the next agenda item. So the two items tonight, state law requires, or the two items in this agenda item, requires a public hearing for the review of the annual report and for the PFA to review the infrastructure finance plan. The contents of the annual report include a description and assessment of projects undertaken in the current fiscal year, an analysis of actual versus budgeted revenues and expenses, and the amount of revenues expended to assist private businesses. And the purpose of the IFP annual review is to approve any changes to the IFP, including addition of new territory, increase of dollar limits allocated to the plan, and consideration of changes to the improvements in the IFP, in which currently staff does not recommend any changes for approval in tonight's meeting. This is the second occurrence of presenting and approving the EIFD annual report and IFD annual review. Therefore, the annual report provided in Attachment 1, Exhibit A, details the activities of the EIFD in the current fiscal year and review of the activities in fiscal year 23-24. Current legislation requires that the PFA review and approve the annual report before June 30 of each year, And as such, information in the current fiscal year does not reflect, it reflects unaudited data. So therefore, staff includes a look back at the updated and audited information for the previous fiscal year, in addition to unaudited information for this current fiscal year. Previously adopted annual reports may be viewed on the city's EIFD IFD webpage. So this table shown on the slide, it provides an overview of the fiscal activities of the district, summarizes revenues and expenses since fiscal year 2017-18, which was the year after the fund formation of the EIFD. And the EIFD began accruing funds in fiscal year 17-18, the year after formation. And the city directed tax increment to the EIFD fund through fiscal year 2020 to 2021. And council has the authority to direct tax increment to the EIFD fund or other city funds, in which in fiscal year 2021 to 2022, the city directed tax increment to Measure G to continue funding improvements of community-wide significance. And furthermore, the city could not use EIFD fund revenues that had been previously appropriated until an EIFD policy was updated, EIFD policy was adopted, which was approved by the PFA last year via Resolution 24-2, and which will be coming back to minor amendments under consideration through Resolution 25-2 tonight. As shown on this table, in fiscal year 2023 to 2024, the EIFD fund received a budget transfer deposit in the amount of $1.6 million, as shown in the budgeted revenues, in addition to approximately $109,000 in interest and investment pool earning. So combined, the actual revenues for fiscal year 23-24 were about $1,709,000. And in fiscal year 23-24, the fund incurred minor costs of about $1,800 for bank fees. In fiscal year 2024 to 2025, current fiscal year, the EIFD generated nearly $171,000 in interest and investment pool earnings. And on last year's PFA meeting, August 21st, 2024, the PFA budgeted nearly $4.8 million toward I Street Bridge replacement to the I Street Bridge replacement project, and also consultant costs related to the bond issuance preparation that you'll be hearing tonight. As of the date of the annual report, approximately $4,716,000 had been expended through appropriation to the I Street Bridge replacement project and bond consultant. So on status of projects that have been funded with the EIFD, the city and PFA appropriated just over $6 million to the I Street Bridge replacement project. Discrepancy between that last slide of 4 million some odd and the 6 million is that there was a past council appropriation of 1.562 million in fiscal year 21-22, and the appropriation of 4.488 million in fiscal year 24-25. And so these funds had been appropriated to advance final designs, engineering, and cost estimates to prepare the project for bidding in the coming months, plus finalize land acquisitions needed for the bridge right-of-way. Both activities are expected to be completed this year, and the project construction is anticipated to begin in 2026 and completed in 2030. And just as a note, the EIFD has not been used to fund any to assist any private businesses, so I don't have a slide on that. And so this is the conclusion of my presentation. Staff recommends that PFA conduct a public hearing of the annual report. Following the close of said hearing, adopt Resolution 25-1, approving the annual report and the IFP annual review. Thank you, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Polhemus, for the presentation. Before opening the public hearing, I'll turn it over to the board if there's any questions at this time for Mr. Polhemus.
I have a quick question. I'm looking at page 41 on the new development opportunities. The majority seem to be situated, I believe in JC. In what district are we looking at these?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm just asking where the majority of these proposed development opportunities, what are we looking at? Are we looking at this entire bridge area? Is that where the majority of these recommendations come from?
No, I'll go to that slide where it shows so the new development opportunities, they are a reflection of the projected build out or the growth that is to occur within the EIFD sub areas shown on this map. So as you can see, they're spread all, throughout the city, primarily in the northern part of the city with additions of the Southport Industrial Park, Seaway, and areas of the Stone Lock District. So this is just a reflection of what is the anticipated growth that would occur or, based on the general plan projections that we have for these sub areas of the EIFD. And they are used in the analysis for projecting what tax increment growth that we can generate. So does that help answer your question?
Somewhat, it's just that it seems to be different on page 41. That's why I have that question. The majority seems to be focused on the south, where we've already had a lot. That's fine.
So this is not necessarily a reflection of the growth that has occurred. This is the reflection of what is projected, what the build out is of these areas.
All right.
So it's not a tracking, not a recordation of how much growth has occurred in these areas. It's based on the horizons that are established in the general plan. What is the potential build out based on zoning and land use, what the land use designations are for those areas.
All right.
And also one thing to point out, I think your question was going there too. So this is only for the areas that are included within the district. It shows the projected growth in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
This is by no means the overall growth in the entire city. So there are other parts of the city that are not included within the EIFD that obviously have growth plans. So the table you're looking at is sort of the best guess at this point on the growth that will occur in the areas you see on this map.
Yep, Board Member Guerrero.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Board Member Alcala, your question, I'm trying to see, I'm not sure if your question was answered, and I'm trying to see if there's a way to frame it a little differently. I think what you're looking at is based on this map and the development, it's kind of like an overlay. And then the expenditures, because I heard the word investment, I think somewhere in your question, where is the money going? That the question?
Well, I was wondering, because when I looked at 41, I saw new development opportunities, and I wasn't certain if these were the only ones being considered.
New development.
New
Go
development.
ahead.
That table doesn't necessarily show how, where the investment priorities are. It's just a documentation of what growth may occur during the time frame of the EIFD. The list of projects where we have right now the authority to invest in projects is on page 42, pages 42 and 43. That's the list of eligible projects that are in the infrastructure finance plan. And as we've been discussing earlier tonight, any recommended changes to that list or any recommended changes to additional territories that may be proposed in the EIFD, that would have to go to, it would go through this process where we review this annually and make that recommended change approved by you all, the PFA board, the authority.
City Council once if we approve that language.
Well, the legislation or the EIFD law requires that these exhibits, any changes to these exhibits are approved by the PFA.
And then thank you for the questions, board members. Are there any other questions at this time? And if not, I'll just chime in real briefly, Mr. Malhimas, and just, I think, again, to reiterate your last point, my understanding and from what you just said, these list of improvements on pages 42 and 43, if there were additions or deletions or changes, that would be the PFA's role. It's if there are tweaks that need to be made consistent with these projects already on the list. What's being proposed in item 4 tonight is that the council would approve.
So I don't,
Is that
I
correct?
don't want to, as they're working on this, I don't want to state anything that.
So
I
again, the intent of the language behind the policy that we're proposing is that to clarify that any changes to the actual IFP, so the plan that governs the operation of the district and kind of lists the overall types of projects that will be financed, any changes and amendments to that plan would be brought to the authority for review and approval. The actual expenditure of EIFD bond funds, though, provided that they're consistent with the IFP, is the purview of the city council and will be reported to the board on at least an annual basis. That's where we're going here. So hopefully that helps. I missed the question, but that's.
It does. No,
I think
thank you,
I
Mr.
got
City
it.
Manager. I was just saying, you know, when it comes to adding or deleting items on this list of proposed improvements that are part of the IFP, again, amendments to the IFP would be made by the PFA. Any tweaks that are consistent with the IFP, what's being workshopped right now would be purview of city.
Right, for the actual expenditure of
Expenditures.
EIFD funds.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the insightful questions from board members. If there are no other questions, I'll thank Mr. Polhemus, and I will open up the public hearing.
We have no requests to speak on this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With no request to speak, I'll go ahead and close the hearing and bring it back to the Public Financing Authority. Does the Public Financing Authority board members have any additional discussions or questions they want to make? Or is there a motion for the staff's recommended act?
I'll move to approve staff.
I think Board Member Sulpicio Hall beat you just slightly to
By a
make the
second.
motion, and the second can be Board Member Guerrero.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk.
Member Alcala?
Aye.
Member Sulpicio Hall?
Aye.
Member Guerrero?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez?
Aye.
Chair Hirsch?
Aye.
And Mr. Chair, we have language proposed for the previous item, if you'd like to return to that one ahead of the.
Yes, I think that probably would be appropriate for item number 6. So at this time, let's go back to our previously tabled item number 4, whichever city staff is.
Sure,
appropriate to
I
present.
think it's me at this point. So if you could turn to the red line page, I think it was in your packet, it was page 28, 20 or 29. Sorry, do the same thing.
I believe it's both for the
Yes.
few changes.
It is. But starting on page 28, where it reads, after the bullet points, where it starts the EIFD, I'm just going to read into the record the proposed clean version of that paragraph, and I'm going to keep going into the next paragraph, because that's where the changes occur. So what we're proposing to replace the language with, it would read, the EIFD IFP identifies facilities planned for the district, for district investment. These improvements may change over time as EIFD law continues to evolve and as the city updates its planning documents. Proposed changes to the EIFD IFP will be reviewed and approved by the authority. Projects will be prioritized that best accomplish EIFD goals as described above and will be considered as part of the City Council's annual strategic plan. Evaluation criteria will accompany EIFD funding requests as part of the city's budgeting process. So that's the first paragraph. Then the heading EIFD number 1, revenue allocation. To maximize investment opportunities, EIFD tax increment revenues will be directed to the EIFD fund to pay for annual debt service and coverage of potential EIFD bond issuances and administrative activities related to district implementation, e.g. auditing, annual reporting, bond, and legal counsel. All other tax increment revenues will be directed to the Community Investment Fund, Measure G, to pay for facilities and activities consistent with the criteria established for Measure G funding and is outlined in the Community Investment Fund policy. Improvements and associated administrative costs funded with EIFD bond proceeds will be reviewed and approved by the City Council through the city's budgeting process and received by the authority at least annually through the EIFD annual report. And then there was a couple of the red lines after that noted on page 29 that would remain the same.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. And I know I was the board member who first requested changes, so I'll comment that I think those changes satisfy my concerns, but I'll turn it over to my fellow board members for any additional discussion. If no additional discussion, I would, and I'm going to make sure I'm wording the motion correctly, move to approve the staff's recommended action for this item, which is to adopt Resolution 25-2 approving minor changes to EIFD budget policy as was just read by the city manager.
Second.
So with that motion by myself and second by Board Member Guerrero, Madam Clerk.
Member Alcala?
Aye.
Member Sulpicio Hall?
Aye.
Member Guerrero?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez?
Aye.
Chair Hirsch?
Aye. Guys have it, and I do thank city staff for the work on that. And I'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the regular agenda, item number 6, resolution 25-3.
Good evening, Chair Hirsch and members of the Public Financing Authority. I'm Tracy Michael, Director of Economic Development and Housing. And this item before you pertains to the issuance and sale of EIFD number 1 bonds. I'd like to say I have the privilege of being able to present this item, but this really was a group effort over many years in the making. So I want to recognize our Finance Director, Roberta Raper, our Capital Projects Interim Public Works Director, Ariana Dame, our Community Investment Manager, Mark Polhemus, and our City Manager, who's the OG of EIFDs, for doing much of the heavy lifting on behalf of the city. And we also have a small army of consultants that we've been working with over the past year, many of whom are here this evening, who have helped to prepare information for the agenda this evening and are also available to answer questions. There we go. So the recommended action for this item is that staff respectfully recommends that the EIFD number 1 Public Financing Authority adopt Resolution 25-3, which authorizes the following actions. Approve the issuance and sale by the EIFD of the City of West Sacramento Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District number 1 bonds in an amount not to exceed $80 million. Authorize the execution and delivery of the pledge agreement in substantially the form that's attached to your report. Authorize the appropriate officers of the EIFD and this authority to do any and all things and take any and all actions and execute any and all certificates, agreements, and other documents which they or any of them may deem necessary or advisable in order to consummate the transactions described in the resolution. Okay, so just a little recap. Mark covered a little bit of this for EIFD number 1. It is an area that encompasses over 4,000 acres, about a quarter of the city's geographic area. It has 14 sub-areas that we were also recently discussing. Most of these areas, all of these areas actually, were previously included in a former redevelopment project area. And just a note that similar to the redevelopment project area, revenues generated from the EIFD district are not a new tax on property owners, but they are a result of increases in assessed property values, in this case for the district from its base year, which was 2016. So going back just before 2016, background to how we got to where we are today, the City Council initiated efforts to adopt the EIFD number 1. They approved the infrastructure financing plan for EIFD number 1, which identified projects and facilities eligible for EIFD funding. That was pages 42 and 43 of the last report, and established EIFD number 1 Public Financing Authority. In 2017, the PFA in place established the West Sacramento EIFD number 1. The PFA also adopted the infrastructure financing plan to finance certain projects and facilities. Between 2016 and 2024, EIFD number 1 generated growth in property tax assessments. And we are now at a point where that growth has supported the issuance of bonds. Last year, the PFA authorized the issuance and sale of bonds by the EIFD in a not-to-exceed amount of $686 million. That was the overall cap for bond issuances for the EIFD. At that time, the PFA also authorized the filing of a judicial validation for EIFD bond sales and issuance. Recently, in April, just last month, the validation judgment in favor of the city and EIFD was received by the Yolo Superior Court. And with that, tonight, and what's italicized here on the screen is EIFD number 1, Public Financing Authority consideration of the first bond sale and issuance for EIFD number 1 in amount not to exceed $80 million. Back in 2012, post-redevelopment, the City Council adopted the Community Investment Action Plan, which established public investment goals for infrastructure and economic development to help catalyze private investment, improve the local economy, create new revenue for the city, and enhance residents' quality of life. It is that plan that helped to inform the EIFD funding goals, which include a number of items listed here: assisting with infrastructure investment gaps, providing a stable source of revenue for capital investment, leveraging and inducing private investment, as well as outside funds, such as state and federal grants. It can be used in conjunction with other local financing revenues, such as community facility districts or other assessment districts. And it also supports pre-development efforts, land assembly, environmental cleanup, adaptive and creative reuse of existing real estate, assets, and projects that have a community-wide or regional benefit. I do want to note that there is a requirement that 85% of bond funds must be spent on eligible projects within a 3-year period from the date of the bond issuance. EIFDs have many allowable uses as prescribed by EIFD law under state government code. An EIFD may finance the purchase, construction, expansion, improvement, or rehabilitation of all of the facilities listed here. This is a very general list of facilities. But they can be located in the district, or they can be located outside the district but have a direct benefit and connection to the district. The EIFD number 1 IFP, Infrastructure Financing Plan, identifies facilities eligible for district investment under some major categories, and that's that list that's on page 42 and 43 of the last report. And the project types are broadly categorized: transportation, parking facilities, water, sewer, drainage, city buildings, park and recreation amenities, and economic development projects. On the right side of this slide are examples of some of our current projects that would fall within those categories. It's these projects and many others like this that would be a good fit for and eligible for bond funding. And so to transition to the bond funding portion of this presentation, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kenneth Deeker. He's a principal at Del Rio Advisors and is our municipal advisor to the city. And he'll walk through the actual bond issuance and financing details.
Thanks, Ms. Michael. Ken Deeker with Del Rio Advisors. Yeah, so I'd first like to congratulate, if the board takes the actions tonight, this will be the very first EIFD bond issuance in the state of California, and obviously for the EIFD district. We do plan on issuing future bonds within the district as increment grows. As Ms. Michael mentioned, the validation judgment was done by the Yolo Superior Court on April 17th, and a lot of the documents that you reviewed at the August meeting of this board basically was to set up the legal structure by which these bonds would be creditworthy to the street, and that was validated through the courts. Very long process. So with us tonight, obviously the city attorney, Jeff Mitchell, and his firm was very instrumental in the validation process. You met Mr. Baranoff earlier today from Lozano Smith. He is our bond and disclosure counsel. I'm the municipal advisor on the transaction for the authority. Fiscal consultant was Kaiser Marston, who's done a lot of projections and prepared a lot of tables for the documents that you've seen tonight. We have one of our underwriters with us tonight, Dennis McGuire from Piper Sandler. Underwriters Council is not present, and we have a U.S. Bank as our fiscal agent. These are all people that are working on this project and have been working on it since well before August when we brought this item initially. Next slide. So a little bit of details about what we're proposing here. There is an amortization over 30 years, assuming no growth in assessed values, considering increases in incremental revenue in 2038, when all the successor agency obligations mature, and again in 2045 when the Bridge District IFD bonds mature. The City Council is considering tonight the issuance of IFD bonds for the Bridge District. There is a flow of funds where money will flow from the RPTTF to the Measure G. IFD revenues will first pay IFD bonds, and ultimately, as those two entities expire, there'll be additional incremental revenue that will flow to the EIFD, providing additional bonding capacity. As I mentioned earlier, future bonds are planned for the EIFD before the EIFD terminates 45 years from now in 2069, 2070. Boy, that seems like a long time out, doesn't it? One thing to consider here is this is a young project area. And what I mean, it may not be young to the folks in the city and who live here, but it is a young project area from a credit perspective. Just to give you some idea, the top 10 taxpayers represent about 25.3% of the total AV or assessed value of the project area, and 60% of the incremental revenue that flows in. So that is a very top-heavy project area based on some relatively large property owners. This credit will improve, I should say should, but it will improve significantly over time as you invest in the project area, as additional businesses come in and it becomes more diversified. The credit of this project area will improve significantly. The financing team took this to S&P, Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies, and asked them to do a rating evaluation service, and we proposed 3 options for them to consider. One was to have 150% debt service coverage. That means the incremental revenues would be 1.5 times the annual debt service, and that would last basically in perpetuity for the remaining life of the project area. 135% debt, by the way, the first one, the 150% debt service coverage, received a BBB rating. That is an investment grade rating. Lower investment grade, but an investment grade rating. The 135 debt service coverage option, again, 1.35 times debt service every year until the bonds mature. That was rated BBB minus. That's the lowest investment grade rating by S&P. Or what we call a variable debt service coverage, or commonly known as a springing additional bonds test. So basically what we're trying to do here is the coverage would initially be at 1.5 times incremental revenue to debt service until the project area can withstand a 15% reduction in assessed value. That means all the project area values will go down by 15%. So right now, we believe that that's where it would be at 1.5 times. But when you can go down to a 1.35 times coverage is when you can withstand 15% after significant growth in the project area, ultimately ending up at 1.25 times or 125%. Now, what's really good about that is that ultimately redevelopment project areas ended up generally at a 125 coverage as they matured. What we're trying to do here is take a relatively young district, give it a good credit now, but an even better credit with more flexibility and more bonding capacity as the project builds out and as assessed values grow. And you're less reliant on those top 10 tax. In addition, the financing team approached both Build America Mutual and Assured Guarantee about the acquisition of bond insurance and a surety policy to replace a cash-funded reserve fund for the bonds. We did receive insurance quotes from both firms. We have selected Assured Guarantee. This means the bonds will go from a BBB minus rating to an insured rating of AA, lowering the interest rates and increasing the capacity. However, that is not a done deal yet. We are still negotiating with Assured Guarantee as to several of the credit factors that they're requesting. We think we're going to get there. So anyway, just to let you know that we do hope to sell this as a AA credit with insurance. And the surety bond, let me take a step back. Generally, with a rated transaction without insurance, you would have to fund a reserve fund equal to about 1 year's debt service on the bonds held by the trustee in the event of default. If we can buy a surety policy to replace that, that frees up, in this case, about $5 million that would otherwise go to the reserve fund, can go to the project fund for additional projects. So the insurance is a big piece of this plan, and we're hoping to secure final authorization with Assured Guarantee. Next slide. A little hard to see. I'm sure you've got this on your screen in front of you. What I wanted to point out by this slide is you can see that projected EIFD revenue starting in like 2025, 26, about $4.3 million a year. This is assuming no growth, so no new projects, no growth in assessed values. But you can see that in between 2037 and 2038, the successor agency obligations are all paid off, and there's a significant jump from about $4.3 million up to $8 million a year. In addition, as the IFD, which matures in 2044, matures, so 20 years from now, there will be another jump of about $700,000 a year. What we are trying to do is to access these, what we know are going to be jumps in the incremental revenue, but again, not assuming any current growth in assessed values. So the agenda item that we drafted, it's about a month ago now, has a little bit different numbers than where we stand today. So what I wanted to do is sort of point out where we were at the staff report time and where we are today. So column 1 showed that we were going to generate about $48.6 million. That's what was in the staff report that was, per the agenda deadline. If we were to not secure the insurance and sell the bonds today, even though it's a BBB- rating, we figured we would generate just over $50 million for project. If we are able to secure the bond insurance and a surety, that number goes up by over $5 million because that what was going to go in the reserve fund is now available for projects within the EIFD. Unfortunately, as you know, there's been quite a move in interest rates since inauguration day. But clearly, I think state rates have stabilized for the time being, so we'll see where things go. Next slide. So there are several documents, in particular, the irrevocable pledge of EIFD revenues. That's the pledge agreement that this board is being asked to approve tonight. The pledge agreement basically says that you pledge to fill up the debt service bucket first from the receipt of EIFD revenues, and then those revenues can be released to Measure G for EIFD eligible projects. But the pledge agreement basically says that this authority, this board, will pledge to make the first debt service payments from the receipt of tax increment revenue, and then ultimately the rest of the revenue, which is that debt service coverage and any available dollars, would then flow through for CIP project. The other thing that will be required is their continuing disclosure. So we have to notice to the street on an annual basis where things stand as far as debt service coverage, reserve fund balances, and these are posted to what's called the Electronic Municipal Market Access System. So we will be doing annual continuing disclosure. If the bonds were to be a rating change, for some example, there are certain material events that we would need to report as they occur during the course of the year. So that will be taken care of by your financing team, but that helps to keep the bondholders who purchase these bonds completely untuned as to what's going on within the district. Finally, so assuming that we get approval tonight, which is what the board's considering, we do plan to post a preliminary official statement. The preliminary official statement is the document used by the underwriters to sell the bonds to investors. We expect this to go to retail, money managers, large institutional funds who invest in municipal bonds. That's their primary marketing document. We do expect to sell the bonds in middle of June and ultimately close and transfer the funds available for projects in mid-July, which is why it's really important that the prioritization of these projects and everything occurs relatively quickly. As Ms. Michael mentioned, you do have to spend 85% of the bond proceeds within 3 years, so it's critical that that gets put into projects and spent as quickly as possible. With that, I'll turn it back to Ms. Michael to finish up.
Thank you. As Kim mentioned, we do have some requirements to ensure that we're spending the bond funds as quickly as possible. So as we move forward, pending action tonight by the authority and also complementary actions by the council and the West Sacramento Financing Authority and IFD number 1, we will move forward to start to refine the list of eligible projects to receive bond funding. We anticipate that we'll incorporate this into the budget process that's already scheduled to go to council in September. With that, we will be looking at projects that are consistent with our city council strategic plan priorities, for projects that, given the time constraints, are more shovel ready and can comply with that 3-year window that we are targeted to spend 85% of the bond funds with. So with that, I want to close with just the recommended action again for the authority. The staff respectfully recommend that the EIFD number 1 Public Financing Authority adopt Resolution 25-3, which authorizes the following actions: approving the issuance and sale of the EIFD of the City of West Sacramento, EIFD number 1 bonds in an amount not to exceed $80 million. Authorize the execution and delivery of the pledge agreement in substantially the form attached. authorize and appropriate the appropriate officers of the EIFD and this authority to do any and all things and take any and all actions necessary to consummate the transactions described in the resolution. So that concludes my presentation, and welcome questions. And again, our entire team that's worked on this is available to help answer questions as needed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Michael. Before questions, I'll just see with the clerk. Are there any public comments on this item?
We have no request to speak on this item.
Thank you. In that case, to the board members, any questions or comments for discussion?
Thank you, Ms. Michael. And things have changed since we started the planning of the CIFD as far as the costs associated with the projects. Has there been any additional consideration associated with increased costs? For example, the bridge, as we know, taking a year can increase it, significantly as far as materials and the work. Just making sure that we are going to approve this. We are asking for a set amount of money. We did have these expectations it'll cover certain costs, but just wanted to put that out there really quick.
Well, thank you, Authority Member Guerrera. It really points to the need to use EIFD funds to leverage other funding sources, because we are seeing project costs increase, but that's one of the things that we're taking into consideration as we refine the list of eligible projects, projects that can leverage funding, projects that are ready to go, because the longer it takes to implement projects, the more the costs increase as well. The amount of bond funding that we have is actually quite a bit of money to spend in a 3-year period. So we'll be working hard over the next few months to bring a refined list of eligible projects forward to the council for consideration that will help us ensure that we're spending the money and investing in projects that help us to increase the assessed values in the EIFD. That will again continue to grow the EIFD assessed values for future bond issuances.
One more.
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, thank you. One more question. As we take a look at projects, I think the ones, I'm only just going to throw out an opinion. I know that the authority is interested in oversight the expenditures, but those that are shovel ready, that we can move forward quickly. Trying to get a federal grant these days, I don't know. It's we just finished coming back from Cap to Cap with some discouraging news, but we're going to be optimistic. But some of these projects do require some federal matching dollars to make it whole. And if not, I guess what I'm thinking is we would have a much narrower list of projects and my only concern is the timeline. I'm looking at the timeline with current administration and our ability to leverage that leveraging aspect of it. Just wanting to be realistic and making sure we don't lose this opportunity. And if we couldn't meet the timeline, what is the alternative?
You want to respond to that
Sure.
one? Okay.
First, I think it's important to note that your point's obviously well taken in the environment. There aren't going to be many new grants from the federal government coming our way, let alone to California. So that's a reality that we have to deal with. The good news is most of the projects that are in our current CIP budget are not projects that are relying on federal funding necessarily. There's the big ones that any new bridge, for example, like the Enterprise Bridge would be one that, we're not building it until we see some potential new funding and change at the federal level. However, there are many other projects that meet the EIFD criteria that are in the IFP categories that are qualified. One of the things I can assure you, both as the sitting PFA board, but also when we get to the city council later tonight, that we're doing is going through our CIP and identifying any project, even if there are projects that are in an advanced stage, up to the point of nearing construction, and we're looking to see where can we place this money in a way that is consistent with the IFP, meets the criteria and the policy, and allows us to spend the money in that 3-year period. We're confident that we can get there. What we'd like to do instead, the ideal scenario is we have some big ticket projects. One that I'll mention in particular is the Ice Street Bridge Replacement Project. We've always planned for this funding source to be the city's primary local funding for that project. We're nearing a very critical point on the replacement project where we're making funding decisions and going to construction as soon as this time next year. And so that project alone could take up quite a bit of the EIFD funding. But what this allows us to do, as Tracy pointed out, is for the projects that have other funding in them, particularly some of the local funds, whether it's tax measure money or Measure G money that could be programmed, it allows us to look at the EIFD money first and say, is that a better use of funding for those projects that they're eligible for EIFD? So what we anticipate, you're going to have some big ticket items like the Ice Street Bridge Replacement Project, and you're going to have many other uses of EIFD funding that are for, maybe not as flashy projects, but very critical to the city's growth and the current development that we see on the horizon. So we don't think we'll have any problem expending the money, nor are we going to be overly reliant on federal funds. But I will say we're going to be very creative about how this money gets placed as we go forward.
Any other questions or comments, board member?
I appreciate the optimism. I just didn't hear the answer to my question. What's the alternative if we don't get to the?
If we don't spend the money within 3 years, you have to. Yeah, there really is no alternative to. No alternative. Right. There's penalties. It's not good. It affects future bond issuances, our credit rating. We don't foresee a scenario where we won't be able to spend the money. The alternative is really the projects that Tracy showed earlier, which are big projects that have other funding sources and other timelines that we're relying on. If we can't spend the money on those projects, the alternative there is to really look through the CIP and find lots of other places to place EIFD funds, and we're confident that we'll be able to do that.
Okay, making sure we get.
Right.
Was there a comment by board member Hall?
Yes, please. Thank you. Tracy, I think this is a question for our municipal advisor. I'm just curious about our bond rating. And you brought up reviewing the bond rating at some point, and if we are able to negotiate with insurance and get to AA, that sounds fantastic. If that doesn't happen, what would a process look like for us to review our bond rating?
So we went through the rating evaluation process. S&P has indicated that we would be rated BBB minus. We've asked them to go ahead and publish that rating based upon that sliding additional bond test, the 150 down to 135 down to 125. So we will be getting, we're thinking as early as Friday, I think, this week, we will get a published rating from S&P at BBB minus. We will sell the bonds based upon that credit unless we secure the insurance. So that's the difference between the $50 million at a BBB minus versus the $55 million should we secure the insurance. That's where we are right now, and that's what we're trying to negotiate.
So there's no point 5-10 years down the road that our bond rating would be reviewed again.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
so,
that's
so
the
as a
process I'm looking
BBB
for.
minus credit, I believe they are required to do a rating review each year.
Okay.
And if the credit continues to improve, which we fully expect, there could be potential rating upgrades all along the process.
Oh, great.
Then, as we look at to do the next round of bonds, which we're hoping to do in the next few years, as assessed values grow, as incremental revenue continues to increase, we will ask for an additional rating on that bond issue from S&P at that time.
Beautiful. You answered my question. Thank you. And before we move on, I just want to take a moment and just kind of acknowledge the space that we're in right now and I think including the time that took to write the law. This has been like 10 plus years in the making. And so I just want to acknowledge staff and the finance team for all of the work that went into this. And I'd like to acknowledge our city manager who has been there since day one, from writing the EIFD law to getting us to the place that we're the first city to be doing this work. And so it feels like just a normal meeting, but it's actually a really powerful moment that we're here in not only California's history, but our city's history. And so just thank you everyone for your work to get us to where we're at today.
And I can assure you, there's a lot of interest in the bond community as to what's happening.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from authority board members?
Move to approve.
Well, actually, before the motion, if I may, just
yes,
a
sorry,
comment.
go ahead.
Thank you. I want to echo the comments from Member Guerrero and Member Spezio Hall and share the excitement from all the people in the room. I know this is the West Sacramento's EIFD #1, but really I think we're California's EIFD #1, being the first, and I see this, being the first to create an EIFD thanks to the expertise and creativity of city staff present and past, as well as city officials present and past. This is a pretty big moment and a pretty big number for $80 million, up to $80 million issuance of bonds. That's not a small chunk of change, and I have great confidence in the city council and its role that that money will be spent within the next 3 years, because we have so many shovel-ready projects in the city, whether it's the I Street Bridge Replacement Project or others. I remember being a member of the city's Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission back in 2016, talking about the I Street Bridge Replacement Project. So it's great to see that we're at a stage where hopefully ground will break for construction next year and be completed in 5 years, and this is becoming a reality. And so to echo again, Board Member Sulpicio Hall, this is a historic moment for the city of West Sacramento, for the EIFD, and for the state of California. I hope the bond community is watching with great excitement. And with that, if there's a motion to approve this recommended action, happy to.
Move to approve.
Yeah, I'll second.
So a motion to approve by Board Member Guerrero and second by Board Member Sulpicio Hall.
Member Alcala?
Aye.
Member Sulpicio Hall?
Aye.
Member Guerrero?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez?
Aye.
Chair Hirsch?
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. Good luck. Good luck to the bond community. I believe I'm supposed to make a comment about no applause is supposed to be made in this room, but I'll make that exception. With that, in the interest of time, I'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is General Administration Function Part 2, Executive Director's Report.
I think that's me, and no report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, item B, Report of Public Financing Authority Actions. Is there any report to be made? If not, item C, a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Aye, second.
All right, Madam Clerk?
Member Alcala?
Aye.
Member Sulpicio Hall?
Aye.
Member Guerrero?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez?
Aye.
Chair Hirsch?
Aye. Thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
Congratulations.
Very exciting.